Welcome, warriors. We are blessed to have Nichole on the podcast today. Like you, she has experienced multiple traumas. However, she experienced three of them in approximately 6 months. Grab a tissue and learn how she battled through one storm after another and then came out stronger on the other side. Let's rock.
Does your past haunt you? Maybe you're in a storm that feels like it will never end. Are you fighting a battle that's rendering you hopeless? Maybe you feel like you're fighting alone, but your battle was not meant to be a solo endeavor. You were meant to be a warrior among warriors. My name is Heather, and I grew up thinking my battles were nobody's business until I found myself in an abusive marriage and felt cut off from all avenues of help. In this podcast, you will hear warriors' words. They will tell you of their battles, both won and lost, their journeys, and their lessons learned along the way. But we don't stop there. These warriors will share how they have applied those lessons to go from warrior to survivor to thriver. Whether it's an abusive marriage, illness, mental health crisis, or any number of traumas this world dishes out, these warriors will use their words to help you find the beauty in your broken, move beyond your battles, and become the thriver God created you to be. Pick up your sword or boxing gloves and join the battle. Your words are powerful, my friends. Make them warrior words.
Welcome back to the Warrior Words podcast. Nichole Haugen is a wife, mom to 6 daughters, nurse, and grief coach. She spent over 10 years as a hospice nurse, helping families through hard times. Nichole knows a lot about grief, both from her job and her own life. In 2019, her dad passed away after a long fight with cancer. And just 4 months later, her mom died suddenly in a winter storm. On top of that, she discovered her husband had been hiding financial problems for over 10 years. Through all of this, Nichole found a path to healing, forgiveness, and learning to live with grief. Now, as a grief coach, she supports others on their grief journeys, helping them feel understood and reminding them they don't have to face it alone. Now, before we hear Nichole's story, here is a review from Loren Collins. Love Heather's content. These stories are so encouraging. Keep doing what you're doing, Heather. Love your heart. Thanks, Loren. You made my heart full with this review. Thank you so much for encouraging me. Would you like me to read your review on an upcoming episode? Please go to Apple Podcasts and leave a review for the show. Your comments and your star ratings help people find the Warrior Words podcast, and it only takes a few minutes of your time. Please also share the episodes, share the show with people you think who would enjoy it, whether it's a specific episode or whether it's the show as a whole. Every share expands the reach of the podcast. And as I've mentioned in a few recent episodes, the Warrior Words Facebook community is open. Please come join us for inspirational stories, lessons learned, and beauty bombs. Go to facebook.com/groups/Warrior Words. Hit the request to join button. A couple of questions will pop up after hitting that button. Please answer those. And then I look forward to getting to know you better in there. Now, on to the show. Hi, everyone. As you heard in the intro, we are blessed to have Nichole Haugen here with us today. Welcome to the Warrior Words podcast, Nichole.
Hey, thank you. Thank you for having me.
So glad that we could coordinate our schedules and get this going. So this is being recorded in December, and we have an awful lot of holidays in December, especially Christmas, and it brings up a lot of emotions. And so you have a lot of experience with grief, and that is one of those big emotions that comes up around this time of year. So, but I do want to caveat with this does not necessarily just apply to December, because grief is a 365-day, it's not limited. So With that, I will ask if you would like to share your story with our listeners and how you encountered and dealt with grief.
Yeah. Thank you for having me. And my grief story really, it kind of began before I even personally knew grief. I mean, I had grief some growing up. My grandparents died. I had a cousin who was close to me. He died suddenly when he was 15. His heart, he was at track practice and his heart just stopped. So I knew grief. Um, But I became a nurse and I became a hospice nurse and I found a passion in that. And I really loved helping people navigate those final days with their loved ones, helping people just prepare what to expect, what to watch for, that kind of stuff. And then in 2019, so my dad had been diagnosed with cancer in 2009, and it was prostate cancer, but it migrated to, it was stage 4 by the time they found it. So it was already in his bones in 2009. And then he lived for 10 years with that cancer. And
Wow.
around Easter time, yeah, it was, I mean, pretty unexpected, but
Mhm.
again, a lot of little miracles along the way with that. And so around Easter time, 2019, we could see things were progressing. He was in more pain. And so my mom called me and she was like, during the night, like, dad can no longer get up. He can't move. He's like paralyzed basically, from the waist down. And so it's like, okay, what are we doing? Are we like aggressively getting treatment here, figuring out like surgeries? Or does he want to just say, no, let's go in hospice? So he opted for hospice. And so I went home and I helped them get that lined up. Obviously I was not his nurse, but
Right. Yeah.
having a lot of knowledge in that area, I helped get the things we needed. He stayed at home and then he passed away at the end of July that year. I was also during that time pregnant with my sixth child. I have six girls. And so
Wow.
a lot of emotions, hormones, right? Like it's that anticipatory grief. And then like when he passed away, like you're relieved because he's not in pain, but it's still sad and dealing with that. And then going to work as a hospice nurse, and a lot of things would remind me of him or trigger that
Yeah.
grief. And then December, so about 4.5 months later, my mom suddenly passed away. My brother called me on a Monday and said, he lives about a mile from where my parents' farm was. And so
Mhm.
he was like, the garage door was left open. Have you seen or heard from mom? And it's like, no, like we'd just come back from a trip all together. And it's like, no, I haven't heard from her. So he's like, something's wrong. And so he called the authorities. We could not find her for that day. We had people out searching. Alzheimer's runs in my mom's side of the family. So I was concerned that all this grief and stuff had triggered something,
Right. Yeah.
some memory loss. But later that evening, like very cold. I'm from North Dakota, so it's very cold up here, a lot of winter storms. Um, the wind shifted that evening. We were able to see that her tire tracks went out onto the water. And so how her driveway was the water was just equal and it's surrounded by water. And so when it snows, you really can't see this tiny gravel road going through the water. And
Mm.
then with the wind blowing, you especially couldn't see it. And when she turned, you could see she thought she turned onto the driveway and she didn't. And so her car went into the water. Then it took them a day or so to get the car out of the water because, again, it was like -50 at this point. Equipment kept freezing up. And then they got her car out of the water, and then they discovered her body was not in the car. So she
Mm.
was trying to get out, or she did get out of the car. Um, so it took about a day or so later till they found her body in the water and were able to recover her body. And then we had a funeral, and this was right around Christmas time. So we realized she was missing on December 9th. Her body was found December 12th. And then the next week we had her funeral on the 19th, and then Christmas was a week later. And
Yeah.
so it was just a lot of just numbness getting through the
Mhm.
holidays for the kids. And then a month after my mom died, I discovered that there was financial infidelity in my marriage, that my husband had a lot of credit cards out with a lot of debt. And so it was just another blow and another
Mhm.
grief. I was grieving the loss of the marriage I thought I had because I never thought he would lie to me. I never thought he would hide these things from me. And so 2020 was a lot of navigating and drowning in grief.
Yeah.
Hmm.
And then and then
Yeah.
COVID hit
And
on
then
top
COVID.
of all of that.
And then COVID. So,
Wow. Yeah.
yeah.
So that's a triple gut punch.
Yeah.
Wow. I can imagine. And especially you mentioned that you had that horrific accident in December and trying to navigate the holidays. And I think that's what's so important about sharing this at this time of year, because even though I said in the intro that, grief doesn't seek out holidays, it's around us all year long. It just seems to amplify those emotions because we're all getting together and now somebody is missing, or some of us are sad and some of us aren't as sad, or for whatever reason, and there's just big emotions everywhere. So with your dad's death, that one was kind of expected, and then with your mom's was very unexpected, and then you get this third punch of financial. How how did you navigate that? Because you have the training to understand grief and hospice and loss of life, especially when it's no, planned is not the right word, expected. But
Mhm.
did your training help you with your mom's death, since that was unexpected?
I mean, it did and it didn't. I think with my mom, a lot of things surprised me. And I think I knew what was happening. I knew it was grief. I knew a lot of
Mhm.
the things I was experiencing was grief, but I had never really dealt with that on that level with when you're working in hospice. So oftentimes, like it is expected because you bring people on services. And even if it is like a very short, they were on hospice services for 24 hours, like you still had that kind of, okay, like this is where we're at, that kind of that realization moment. And for with my mom, it was that we had to realize that after and throughout the whole process, because at first it was just like maybe she's just missing. And then pretty soon it's like, okay, well, she's been missing now and it's bitter cold out. Like, what are the odds that she would even survive? So it was just like processing that over and over and over again. And so there are similarities with the expected grief because like you are still doing that, but a part of you knows like, yes, this is what I'm gonna like. I know this is what's coming up. This is what I'm gonna go through. And with the unexpected, it's such a punch to the gut.
You know. So do you handle the grief differently, or is there a different way to process it and work through it when it's expected versus unexpected?
I think that it's quite similar, how to handle it. And that's what I like to coach people through that. And I always tell them like the biggest thing is to allow the feeling when it comes up because our
Mhm.
natural inclination is to just like push things away and to run and to like take on more work or to be distracted with something. And that's where the holidays can add onto that because like there's so many other things that come up and so like to allow those feelings as they come is not fun.
No,
It's not fun
no.
at all. But I do think that the process is a lot of the same. With the unexpected grief, I would say that there's things that trigger you that you can take you off guard a lot more. And
Mhm.
so that is a harder part to navigate.
And then how, or maybe not how, so you didn't have a whole lot of time between your mom's death and the Christmas holidays and then the discovery of the financial infidelity. Would you say that I don't think you ever really fully process everything, but I guess where were you in navigating the processing of your mother, the grief of your mother's death, and then this other betrayal, this infidelity.
Yeah. I don't even think I had started to process it. I was still very much in like the numb phase, like
Mm.
just trying to get through the day, like everything. It's like a fog that you're walking through. They call it grief brain, and like that's a real thing. It's kind of like pregnancy brain, where like you're just bouncing from thing to thing and just
Mhm.
trying to get through the day. Like it feels like that, but maybe a little bit more compounded.
Mhm.
And so yeah, you're like I was just going through that and just okay, we're gonna kind of keep this. We kept the same traditions, like that first Christmas,
Mhm.
basically just to like keep it how it was because none of us wanted to make a decision or make any choices of where do we
Right.
have Christmas or how do we do anything different. So we just kind of kept it the same. And then so for me, with when the financial infidelity stuff came up, in my mind, it was very closely connected with my parents' death. So anytime after that, when I would be triggered by something that felt like betrayal or a mistrust in my marriage, I would feel immense sadness because they were linked together for
Right.
me.
Because they were so close,
Yeah.
close together, and you had to almost process them simultaneously. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I do like what you said though about keeping, I realize maybe I'm jumping back here, but I like what you said about keeping the same traditions. Because you also mentioned that at the time of your father's death, you were pregnant with your sixth child. So that means that at the time of all of this, you've got six kids and they have to process this grief because they've lost both of their grandparents now. I mean, I realize the younger ones don't quite grasp that, especially your infant daughter, but um I think the idea, and maybe correct me if I'm wrong, but the idea, the concept of keeping the traditions the same when they are also experiencing this grief in their own way, that that would help them to kind of walk through that season where things are now different than they were the previous one. Would you say that was
Yeah, I
that
I
was
mean I think so. And I think that, circumstances for different people, like so we were um blessed enough we didn't have to worry about instantly moving things out of the house.
Mhm.
Um, I know a lot of people that I work with, like they have to sell the home quickly, or move on with that. For us, we didn't have to do that. And in fact, my brother still lives there today. So like it was, we did clean out the house, we had to do that, but we were able to take time. And so, yes, for that first Christmas, it was very much like we set up the Christmas tree out at their house. We had the same food we normally do. We went to Christmas mass together with my siblings and our families. And so we kept things the same for that year. Now, fast forward, we have kept some of the same traditions. And I always tell people, like, if it brings you immense sadness to do that, you're doing it just out of like guilt and trying to like, because it's what we've always done, then like
right,
reassess that. But for us, it has been healing for me. I don't know, I can't speak for my siblings, I guess, but for
right.
me, it's been healing to be the one we always make Nichole soup is one of our meals for Christmas. Even my mom would always make it. And so for me, I'm the one who now makes the Nichole soup. And so there's sadness with that. Like I am sad that she's not there, but and just in fact, I don't know, I think it was last week, there was something I was gonna make for Thanksgiving, and I was like, oh, I should call mom and ask her. And it's like, oh, like, it just kind of hits
Yeah,
you, like,
yeah,
can't. So there is some of that sadness, but choosing which things you want to keep as traditions, found has been very helpful. And yes, to kind of the long way around to answer your question, I do feel like, especially for young kids, it is
mhm,
helpful to not shake everything up all at once for
right.
them.
Yeah. Well, I'm glad then that you brought that up because I realized we were heading in a different direction. But I think if the main focus of this is grief and helping people to navigate the holiday season through their grief and with their grief, that's an important piece of advice to, that they can look at is, maybe keeping some of the things the same so that the entire world is not twisted or turned upside down. Um, so so thank you for for throwing that advice in there as well in addition to your story. Um, so you have all of this stuff going on and you're into 2020. COVID hits not too long after this your financial discovery. How do you walk through? How do you get through 2020 with everything from the summer of 19 still kind of hanging around?
Yeah. And so for 2020 was just purely surviving,
Yeah.
just surviving the day. I mean, we were doing the distance learning stuff. In the spring, they shut down the schools. And
Mhm.
so, I mean, I had three children in school. So young children, mind you, I think they were in kindergarten, second and third. And so it was like setting up the computers for them and all the things. So it was a lot of busy just focus on this, trying to find fun things to do for them. But there was also a lot of really hard days where there were a few days in there where I didn't get out of bed. I was depressed. I just didn't care. Like I knew, okay, my husband's going to take care of them. Like we were fighting a lot because of all the marriage issues. I mean, I realized looking back, like it was not a very good year for my children either, like especially the older ones. I could feel that tension. And,
Mhm.
of course, hindsight is 2020. Wish you could redo things. But
Mhm.
I didn't have the tools that I do now. I didn't know life coaching. So 2020 was basically just trying to figure out where do we go in our marriage? How do we work this out? How do we rebuild that trust?
Mhm.
Um, there was a lot of guilt and shame from my husband's side, like that he felt bad, but he also didn't want to compromise. Like he still wanted his hobby, his collection, his addiction. He didn't want to have to get rid of that. And every time I saw it, it was just a lot of betrayal and hurt. So it was navigating, how do we find boundaries around it? How do we communicate with each
Mhm.
other without there being hurt and pain added on to the hurt
Right.
and pain? A lot of what I found too was that I expected him to know how to help me through my grief of my
Mhm.
parents,
Yeah.
and he had no clue. He'd never lost anybody other than like his elderly grandparents that,
Right.
were expected. He'd never lost anybody like that, especially that
Mhm.
close together, that tragically. So he really had no clue. It was like navigating waters that we had no, like it was uncharted territory for both of us. And so that was what 2020 looked like, a lot of trial and error on our part.
Yeah. Well, you bring up another good point there too. It's very, so you had an expectation that he wasn't meeting, but he wasn't meeting that expectation because he didn't have the knowledge or the means to do so. And I think that happens in marriages. It happens in relationships, I think, all the time. But it's especially destructive in marriages when one person has an expectation and the other one doesn't have a clue how to fulfill that. And so communication is really key. And you guys are struggling because of the other issues involved. So communication is probably not the strongest point or the strongest strength that you have at that point. So is this where you found life coaching, or how does the life coaching fit into the struggles that you were having with communication and finances in your marriage?
Yeah, so yeah, we've struggled through 2020 and it was like, nope, like, okay, let's get a counselor. Nope, let's do it on our own. Nope, like so we went back
Yeah.
and forth a lot. But 2021 came around and in the spring I was like, something has to give. I don't like how I'm acting because I was angry all the time, just
Mhm.
very angry. I didn't like how I was showing up in my marriage. I didn't like how I was showing up as a parent. I didn't like how I felt in my clothes. I like after having six children, I gained weight. And so basically I found life coaching because I wanted to lose weight. And So I was like, okay, like this is what I'm gonna do. And it was also kind of in anger because I was like, well, he's spent money on all these things over the years. I can spend money on myself. So, so that's what I did. I hired a life coach and I lost like 40 pounds really quickly, which then I felt amazing. But when you're no longer coping with food, feelings and emotions start to come up. And so I started to realize like how much grief that I really was still carrying around when I thought I had allowed it and dealt with it. And so I that's what I realized was like I still had so much of that underneath all of it. And so that was what 2021. And then in 2022, I was like, I'm going to help other people. So like that's when I became, I got my certification and became a life coach. And because I think it's thebomb.com. It's just amazing.
Oh, I love that. And I love how, and I'm seeing two threads here because I love how God works. You were trained as a hospice nurse. And then while you weren't his nurse, you were able to help your family navigate your father's hospice. And so God prepared you for that. And now you had all these other struggles, which led you to life coaching for yourself. And now you get to do that. It's almost like it's reversed. You know,
Yeah.
in the first one, God prepared you, used your training to prepare you for something, and then he used your something to prepare you
Yeah.
for the future. And that's wow, that's just amazing to me as I think about it. And so now you've come full circle and now you are the life coach and you are helping others to navigate some of life's storms and traumas and um, you know I started this podcast very naively thinking we'd talk about one trauma. And then as I talk to more and more people, I'm like, you know what? We all have more than one trauma. And
Yeah.
I mean, I do. So why not everybody else, right? And, it's that realization that, trauma's not one and done. And we do need help to get through these things. And it's not, well, not weakness. It's not weakness to ask for help, whether it's through counseling or coaching. And that's a good thing. Can you explain the difference between counseling and coaching? Because I think that's something that a lot of people aren't aware of.
Yeah. So I like to kind of use the analogy of like therapy is like having a doctor, counseling is like having a physical therapist, and then coaching is like having a personal trainer. And
Oh, that's
so
good.
if you're sick, you're going to go to the doctor. Like you just know that. So like if your mind is in a place where you just, I mean, if you're having suicidal thoughts, if you're like, I know something is wrong, like seek out a therapist. However, at the same time, you can also receive counseling and coaching because they overlap, but they're different. And so, really, what coaching does is it helps strengthen your mind. It's for that when you're looking for, I want to do better. Like with my story, where I'm like, something has to give, right? Like I I thought about finding like a therapist or counselor or something, but I was like, I had never had depression before. I had depression with grief. And so like it's a different thing.
Right.
Um, and so that's why I always encourage people to just book a free call with me because I can help you through that because a lot of times it is kind of tricky to know the difference and where to start.
Well, I like your analogy. I like that those three tiers. Um, and then the call to be able to decide whether, or to discern whether that's coaching is right for you or whether you might actually need to seek out a therapist. And I think that everybody I've talked to on this podcast that has mentioned therapy is very pro therapy in that if you need it, certainly seek it out and get it. Yeah. So Well, we've covered we've covered quite a few things today already, and you actually mentioned you alluded to it earlier with your father. You said that there were many little miracles along the way, and so I usually ask everyone to share some beauty that maybe they saw, whether it's while they were going through their traumas or looking back, they can see something that was beautiful in these horrific situations. So is there anything, whether it's overall or whether it's through a specific one of those three traumas, anything that was beautiful that you can share with our listeners?
Yeah, I mean, I can think of many things for all of them,
Oh, it's
but
awesome.
I
Yeah.
think some of the most beautiful things with my dad was he he was very stubborn. He's a very stubborn German man. And my mom was born and raised Catholic, and my dad always said, I will convert when I'm on my deathbed. And we were always like, well, there's no guarantee. You could die tomorrow. And he's like, nope, I'm going to convert on my deathbed. And so he did. He
Oh,
converted, and then
wow.
the priest came, and it was the Wednesday before Easter that in 2019. And so
Wow.
he came into the church, he received the sacraments, and that was very beautiful. And my husband actually was doing the RCIA that year, and he beat him by like 3 days. So my husband was like, I'm going to take all the classes.
Oh, that's
So
beautiful. I got
yeah,
chills.
yeah, yeah. So that was very, very beautiful. And then too, he was able to receive the Eucharist multiple times. The priest came out and administered him that. And my mom was a Eucharistic minister, so she even brought communion back a few times for him. So just that was very beautiful. And he died with a scapular on.
Oh,
So just
wow.
and we were there when he passed away, when he took his few final breaths. My mom um, was sitting by him and noticed the change. So she called us. So we were there when he took his final breaths. And so that too
Blessing.
is beautiful
Yes.
in
Yeah.
itself. It is hard, it's difficult, but it is beautiful as well. And so there was those. And then with my mom, oh, just so many people reached out to us and said, "Hey, we're praying for you." So many people brought food. The hospice I was working for and then a hospice I previously worked for, they both bought gifts for our children and my brother's children for that Christmas. So we didn't have to go Christmas shopping. Just so many people, just so many just kind things that year for us and following. And then also, I mean, with my marriage struggles, that one, the beauty of that, I think, is that we both have kept trying. We've both kept showing up,
Yes.
even on days that like we don't want to. We want to say, no, I'm out, but we keep showing up. And so there is a beauty and grace in that. And along the way, also, I had a cousin who kind of called me out of some of my behavior of like, like forgiveness and
Yeah.
not holding this over his head forever. So that also is beautiful.
Well, that's wonderful though, because I think we started out by talking about your husband's financial infidelity. And just that phrase alone puts all the blame on him.
Yeah.
And then through the conversation, you have admitted to the unforgiveness and the having the expectations and some other things. So what that brings out is that in any kind of marriage or relationship, argument or issue, it's almost never one-sided. There's each person has something. Each
Yeah.
and so I love that. So thank you for being human and admitting that. I think that is it's a difficult thing to do, and I think it's if I hopefully I'm not going to embarrass you with this, but it's like it's such a beautiful thing, and it's a gift that I think you've given to us and to all the listeners that you can admit that, and so I appreciate that.
Yeah. You're welcome.
Um, and so my last official question then will be if you have any warrior words, any advice for our listeners as they maybe have some big emotions or some grief this holiday season and beyond.
Yeah, I think The biggest thing I like to tell people, especially this time of year, is that no is a complete sentence.
Mm.
I know so often we feel guilty. We feel like we have to justify why we're not going to show up or why, like, and I think just saying no is okay, especially if you're in that first holiday without your loved one, even the second or third. And I think people tend to think that, well, it's been a year, it's been 6 months. Like people tend to want to put a timeline on things. And with grief, like you said, like there's no timeline on it. And so no is a complete sentence.
Oh, I love that. And very, very simple and succinct too. Yes. Amen to that. So, where can people come and get that free call that you mentioned, and to maybe learn a little bit more about what life coaching actually is?
Yeah, so you can go to nursegriefcoaching.com and that has where you can book a free call with me. And then through the month of December, I am running once a week a free webinar to about 3 tips to get you through the holidays with grief. So that's at nursegriefcoaching.com.
And I will get that and any social channels into the show notes for people so they can come find you and hopefully take advantage of that those webinars that you mentioned. So, well, thank you, Nichole. I appreciate your time. I appreciate you sharing all of 2019 through 2022 and beyond, and just sharing your gifts with us today. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you.
In baseball, it's 3 strikes and you're out. In 2019, Nichole experienced strike one and strike two. Strike three came quickly in 2020. She even admitted to times when she just wanted to be out. She didn't want to get out of bed, excuse me, and she wanted out of her marriage. And even though she stayed, and she tried to work everything out, but she also admitted to stuffing her emotions with food. How often do we do that? Sometimes it's food, sometimes it's drugs, alcohol, TV, shopping. Oh, I said TV. Gosh, I just showed my age. Streaming, movies. Anyway, there are so many things we can stuff our emotions with. But God has a way of working all things for good for those who love him. And I adapted that from Romans 8:28. In the first part of Nichole's story, we see that God prepared her in a way that she could not only help her own grief, but she could also help her family walk through the storm of her father's death. And then he used her struggle with food and weight to bring about her own healing, developing a way to use her traumatic experiences to help others as they walk through theirs. And I love that he even helped her peel back the layers in her personal coaching experience. She thought she was just there to lose some weight, and she did. But once that layer of weight was gone, that layer that she put on by stuffing her emotions with food, she was forced to face the layers hiding underneath. She was forced to face the layers of emotions and grief she had buried under the food. And that is what a good coach does. If we return to my baseball analogy, a good coach is going to go back to that player who struck out and help him analyze the layers of his stance, his swing, his timing. It's not just one thing. And Nichole's coach helped her see the different things she was doing or not doing that were sabotaging her health, her marriage, her parenting, and her own healing. And then God brought Nichole full circle. He put it on her heart to become for others what her coach was for her. God prepared her to handle her first trauma of 2019 and then used the rest of 2019 and 2020 to prepare her for her future. He definitively used her storms for the good of others. And one other really important thing that stood out to me in this conversation with Nichole: no is a complete sentence. And that's just something to think about this week. And really, really think about that one. Where can you simply say no to protect yourself, your family, and or your own healing? So until we meet again, armor up, fight the good fight, seek beauty, and make your words warrior words.